Okay, everybody, good morning. Today is Tuesday, December 17th, and this is our monthly meeting for the Budget and Finance Committee. So I'm pleased to call this meeting to order. And for those who are able to rise, please rise and join me in our Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you all. We do have a quorum, although we're a bit diminished today. We have two of our members who are on an excused absence. Both Ed and David will not be with us. We have one of our committee members who is remote. That's Mickey Jacobs. But Mickey is here and fully engaged, although we can't see her in person. So thank you, Mickey, and thanks to the rest of the committee. Before we'll go to 1.04 and I'll give you a rundown of our meeting procedures. The governing board conducts all of its meetings, including committee meetings, in compliance with Arizona open meeting laws per ARS 33-1804, and in concert with RCSCW bylaws, policies, and standing rules. Parliamentary procedures, as outlined in the most recent edition of Robert's Rules of Order, will also be followed, consistent with Bylaw 3.07, Procedures for Owner-Member Meetings, and Standing Rules number 2 and number 3. All questions and comments are directed to me, the committee chairperson. All comments are entertained at the discretion of the committee chairperson. Speakers shall state their name and member number and speak in a courteous manner. The committee chairperson may limit commentary time and the number of commentators and speakers on any issue. The committee chairperson may redirect commentary at individual agenda items to the to the general guest comments agenda line item, except when the committee has discussed the agenda item and consensus or agreement is sought. All fire and room safety precautions and regulations are strictly obeyed at all meetings per the guidance of the Arizona Fire and Medical Authority. Excuse me. The committee chairperson reserves the right to adjourn any meeting if the safety of the committee, meeting attendees, or others is deemed at risk, or if there is too much disruption to continue. After one verbal warning by the chairperson, the committee chairperson also reserves the right to ask any meeting attendees to leave any meeting should their behavior be deemed dangerous or unacceptable. Disciplinary action may follow. So thank you. With that, we've established our meeting procedures, and we'll move on to the rest of the agenda. We have minutes from our meeting on November 19th, 2024. Fellow committee, do you see any need for any changes or modifications? Okay, hearing none, we'll accept those minutes as written. Move on to new business. Our CFO, Mr. Cliff Swan, will walk us through our November year-to-date financials.
Good morning, Director Novello, and good morning, committee and community. I'd like to welcome you to the first annual Budget and Finance Christmas pageant. Our new general manager is going to be singing his rendition of O Tannenbaum. Stephen? No.
Now, had we known that, we would have had a crowd in here.
All right. Now we're going to go over the financial results instead. So just, again, kind of boilerplate stuff here, but just talking about what this presentation is, we're going to look at the financial results compared to budget and prior year for the current month, and then year to date. Then we're going to move down into the capital section, do the same thing, and then we'll look at the capital improvement budget and where we're at, and as well as the fully funded balance. So get started. November, right on budget, 13,000 favorable in revenue. Just kind of came in right at budget. I don't know what else to say about that. I will say though, golf bounced back a little bit from October, and we do have an aggressive golf budget this year in rounds. So, not to be alarmed if you see a little bit of a variance there. We're getting after it. Looking at on the expense side, 221,000 favorable. We talked last month about the landscape maintenance and the chemical purchase that Todd made, and talked about the timing of when that happened and what the reason behind that was. So that swung back to a favorable for the month, and then you'll see year to date where we're at. But overall, 221,000 favorable. So for the month of November, 234,000 favorable compared to budget. Comparing that to prior year, 295 favorable in the operating income from operations. Looking year to date, 73,000 unfavorable. Again, we're just trying to hit that budget number for golf, and we'll continue to monitor that as we roll through the year. We did have a little bit of a hiccup at Echo Mesa with the vandalism that happened over there, so that didn't help us in November with some lost rounds due to a closure over there. But overall, 73,000 unfavorable through the month of November, year to date, on revenue. And looking at the expense structure, 266, 636 overall, but 266 is in wages and benefits. Most of that is tied to open seats and overtime. I will say, compared to last year, especially in the golf maintenance world, we've had a better turnout in terms of our filled seats. So with that said, we've had a significant savings in overtime through compared to last year, around 31,000, which is about 900 hours of overtime compared to last year. So if you look at the budget in terms of overall FTEs, we're about 9 FTEs favorable to budget in our total hours for the year. So that's driving that 266. And if you tie the benefits and the overtime and the insurance and all those things and taxes, that's creating that favorable variance to budget and wages and benefits. So good news there. But overall, 636,000 favorable. I will say down in the legal, that bottom kind of conglomeration down there, there's two main drivers in that. One, those security cameras that we talked about last month, that we're just finishing up the project at the sports pavilion with the cameras in the pool hall. So we'll continue to do that camera project, complete that camera project, which has it's about a $50,000 budget item in operating.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to let our AV folks know that the YouTube video does not appear to be broadcasting, so that they could be working on this as we speak. I'm sorry to interrupt
no
you.
worries.
And again, for those who are at home, we're working on it. Thank you.
Okay, the other item in that bucket is about 50,000 in service contracts. I will say overall service contracts, we budgeted for a 6% increase, and those have come in flat year over year. So those renew as the year goes on. So we anticipated a larger increase there than we actually had. So that's part of the savings there. And then the other favorable variance right there is due to just timing. So that'll catch up a little bit, but we will anticipate some savings in that category. But year to date, 636,000 favorable in expenses. So overall, income from operations, 563,000 favorable for the month of November. We are operating at a $2.2 million outflow through November, and that started to swing last month, and it will continue to swing positive as we work through our busy season. Compared to last year, 294,000 favorable year to date. I will say on the operating expenses, we've done a really good job compared to prior year. I believe the wages and benefits category is 221,000 unfavorable. So we're actually 60-ish thousand favorable in all of our other expense categories compared to prior year. 211, again, just talked about that, but all budgeted for. All right, let's go down to the capital section. The month of November, 294,000 compared to budget. We had an unrealized gain in our investments, reserve fund investments of 299,000, and then of course our investment income of 91,000, which was 5,000 favorable to budget. So a good month in our reserve fund for November. Looking at prior year, couple of notes here. Oh, let me go back. I'm sorry. APFs ran a little bit behind in November. They're looking stronger in December, so we'll continue to track that, of course. But those are the two main categories there. So I wanted to talk about that, touch on that. And then compared to prior years, we had a pretty healthy November last year in APF fees. So you know, again, December's looking better, and December was weaker last year, so that should swing the other way. The reserve fund had a larger swing of $1 million last November. Just kind of interesting to look at the two different years and the dynamics of what's going on with the election, no election, those types of things, how those things potentially impact our reserve fund. But so overall, 735,000 unfavorable compared to prior year in the capital related section. And just want to remind everybody, those swings in the reserve fund, that will happen. They'll go back and forth throughout the year. And then overall, you know, at the end of the calendar year, we see what happens in the reserve fund for the calendar year, and we'll continue to report for the next 6 months of the fiscal year for the reserve fund. But something to note is that we did take our lumps in 2022, and it is recovering as anticipated. And we do currently anticipate over $1 million in investment income this year and next year, based on what's going on with the interest rates and the 10-year yield on our fixed income. So we're going to continue to recover in the investment income and dividends side, and we'll continue as interest rates fall, continue to experience a valuation positive change each year. So it's working. It's taking all the 5-year strategy. It's taking all 5 years to do it, but we're getting there. Okay. That said, looking at the year to date, unrealized and realized, about 700,000 positive in our reserve fund, and then year to date 421,000 in investment income through the first 5 months. Pretty good. So 880 favorable overall in the capital related section. Compared to prior year, 846 favorable. We've got the reserve fund is performing better to the tune of 818,000 compared to prior year, which is good. So 818, just talked about that, at 695 plus versus a 123 minus. And then on APF fees, 172,000 favorable. We're still 21 behind, or 5% behind prior year in terms of the number of transactions, but with the increase in the APF fee, we have 172,000 favorable in income. So combining the operations and the capital related, we are looking pretty good. Right now at 1.443 favorable to prior year to date, and to budget, and 1.14 favorable compared to prior year. So let's talk about our capital improvement budget. In this budget, we've got 9.9 million budgeted, and we're still projected at this point to, if all of the POs that are issued come in and all the items that we haven't completed come in at budget, with the current savings, we'll be at 168,000 in savings. The details of that capital improvement budget are on these spreadsheets. So feel free to take a look at those, but you can see how we come to the 168,000. And then a reminder that all of the yellow shaded items are completed and paid for capital improvement items. Looking at the allowances, a budgeted 420,000. We've spent 79,000, approximately 79,000 through November. This is a list of those items. That list will probably double in December. We had some water heaters go out. Water heaters are historically have been less than 5,000 for these water heaters. They're large water heaters, and now they're over 5,000. So we just updated our reserve study to add all of the water heaters, but we had we're doing a replacement at one of the rec centers. I think it's Beardsley. Yeah, Beardsley, we're doing a replacement. So you'll see that hit the allowances. Again, didn't have those on the reserve study because they weren't over 5,000 previously. So you'll see those on there. You'll see a couple other things on there that we had to do that came up, but that'll come up in December. So a little teaser there for you. Okay, so the fully funded balance and the fully funded balance percentage, we're looking good. I mean, it's just with all the positive variances that you see, those will all impact our reserve fund at, ultimately, and we're in the green everywhere. And so we're in good shape, and we'll just see how as the year goes. I mean, with 5 months under our belt, we're looking pretty good. We're definitely anticipated to hit our budget number for sure. That completes my financial presentation.
Thank you so much, Cliff. Before we open it up to the rest of the committee, just a couple quick clarifications. I know we're running under our FTE count. Any those unfilled positions, are they negatively impacting operations at all at this point? I know it's a challenge to get everything done.
Yeah, so some of those hours are being filled with overtime hours. So the work is getting done. I will say also that some of the work isn't getting done. I mean, on the courses, just the landscape areas in general, we're really having to work some extra hours and, really flex and lean on our people that have to make up for that lost labor. So we aren't as efficient, and I will say, the work is generally getting done, but there are standards that we have that we like to keep up. So we're not keeping up to those standards, but we're making it happen, and we're supplementing a little bit with some subcontracted services too on the golf course and the desert areas and trimming. So yeah, I mean, we're getting it done, but it would be nice to have those positions filled for sure. And we'll always have turnover. I mean, with 483 positions, we're always going to have some turnover. We're always going to have some open positions, especially in the ones that are going to be the hardest to fill, like in the landscape area, some of the night janitor area positions. Just, they're not easy positions to fill because they're typically full-time positions that are labor intensive and that we can't fill with our community members. We got to go outside the community to fill those positions.
Thank you for that. One more before I open it up to the committee as well as residents. The unfortunate closure of Echo Mesa, that was covered in the general manager's operations meeting, but for those who weren't there, I believe we had a question at that point about whether or not the revenue might be protected or covered under insurance.
Yeah, so I could talk about that, yeah. So I talked with Hayes, and essentially we've got a 24-hour window that we have to meet first. The next threshold we have to meet, there's a $10,000 deductible. So you got 24 hours, then $10,000, and then you put the claim together and submit everything, and they come back and say, well, you have 7 courses. Why did you have that one closed? Or you could have opened it. You could have played on the course, chose not to, those types of things. So in talking with our Representative at Hayes, you know, we just came to the conclusion that it wasn't worth submitting the claim. It wasn't that much. It was potentially lost revenue of 35,000 or so, and it just to have the mark against us on the claim, and for that type of loss, it just didn't make sense to move forward with that. So we decided not to do that.
Understood, and thanks. I wasn't questioning the operations,
Oh,
but
no,
I know it
no.
came up.
Yeah, no,
thanks.
no. I was answering both questions there.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So now to the rest of the committee. Any questions or comments? Jim? John?
Can you refresh my memory?
Sure.
I was gonna say our, but interest in others favorable quite a bit. Can you
Yes.
remind me
Oh,
what that
we
is?
had a 35,000. We had a $2 million treasury with our operating account that matured, and we booked that revenue, and it was about 35,000, and we did not have that in the budget for November. So that was a large favorable. And the other one is interest in financial. We're down a little bit in revenue compared to what we budgeted. So those credit card fees and things like that are a percentage of that revenue. So that's driving a favorable variance there as well.
So, so the timing's gonna, that budgeted revenue will hit us later on?
Yes, I believe next month. I think we put that in December for the timing of it. So
All right,
it's just
thank
going to
you.
be a timing. But I will say we are tracking ahead of budget in the
Overall,
interest revenue
I just remembering
from
last year
operating account.
it was a big win for us.
Yes,
So I was
Yes.
just wondering if we're
it
expecting
won't be
another
that big
big
of a
one.
win. No.
Dang it. And then just a curiosity question. When I look at the revenue and the expense categories and summaries,
Mhm.
you ever flip the expenses to see it by profit center, so that you see, you have golf revenue up here, but golf expenses are within each of these categories. Do you also look at it the other way where
Yes,
you have those documents?
we do. So we present those at Golf and Sports Pavilion for those divisions.
Mhm.
And yes, we absolutely do. We look at that, and we analyze that with the operators in those areas. And we post those on those different committee meetings, those
Okay.
individual financial statements.
Okay.
So I do a roll up like this, and then
Okay.
there's the other attachment for the financial statement with a more detailed version of the categories
Okay.
for each golf and sports event.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Chris?
When you budget membership, is that literally the rec cards, the number of rec cards we expect, the amount we expect?
Yeah, so that's includes, so membership includes our tenant fees, our associate members, our general members, our owner members, excuse me. It includes guest fees, includes transfer fees. It includes all of those revenue sources.
Okay.
And they do fluctuate a little bit. So we're running a little bit behind
That was my question,
our
really.
member fees, but we're running ahead on our tenant fees because tenants are higher this year. So
So this month that we're reporting is $4,000 negative,
Yes.
40,000 for the year.
yes.
Is that within the normal fluctuation, you think?
Yes.
Or is-
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And Rick, any questions, comments? Mickey, any questions or comments from you?
So the only comment that I would make is that when you look at how accurately our budget appears to be, I would say that the fact that we are generally positive with some variances negative just really goes to the quality of the budgeting process. I did this for 40 years, and I would say that I am impressed by how close the actuals and the budgets are.
Thanks for that comment. It mirrors my experience as well, that if we looked at percentage variance and so forth, we're routinely very close, and that's really what I look for. So thank you again. I echo what Mickey said.
Thank you.
Any other, do we have any questions from our residents? Nothing in the room. And again, online, the only thing that we're noting when it gets to this point we had a little bit of a glitch in starting our live stream. And thank you to our team for resuming that. It looks like it's resumed now, but folks that are watching online are about 12 to 13 minutes behind the rest of us. So it's a little bit of a time travel issue. So when you do hear my voice, if you have questions, we may or may not be able to get to them in a timely manner. We'll do our best. If the meeting has concluded, feel free to email me at christine.novello@suncitywest.com, and we'll do our best to get back to those. So that's it. Thanks again, Cliff. You can stay where you are because I believe you're next up as well for 3.02. Give us a quick overview of our reserve study.
Okay, thank you. I'm excited to present this today. I did struggle a little bit when I was putting this presentation together with the team because I want to give as much information as possible. But this is one of those areas that if you give too much, it's analysis paralysis, really. So we just really want to talk about the impact of what happens here. But feel free to ask any questions, and we can work down through that. So that said, let's get in it. So what is a reserve study? So the reserve study is a budget planning tool for us, to offset ongoing deterioration and plan for inevitable future expenditures. I mean, that's generally what a reserve study is. So for us, we have a $5,000 price limit and a 5-year useful life. So it's the same for our capital assets. So any capital asset for us, essentially, we want on this reserve study. So when I talked about those water heaters earlier, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, those were $3,000. Now they're $5.5. My pool pump just went at my house, $3,500. Used to be $900 for a variable speed pool pump. Okay, that was probably 15 years ago, but still $3,500 for pool pumps. So interesting. So that's the types of things that we have here that we are constantly updating. And our reserve study literally is a living, breathing document. It could change multiple times in a day depending on what happens here. Russ will come up and say, geez, these dang water heaters, they're now $5,600 for one of these now. And we'll have to add those. Or, we'll retire an asset and say, we don't need to replace this, So anyway, there's all types of things that happen within this reserve study, and it is a living, breathing document. So what are the consequences of not having a reserve study? Well, you run the risk of underfunding. So that dirty term of special assessment comes up, where you have to go because you have, if you've deferred maintenance, there's maybe a community near us that may have deferred some maintenance over time, and they may have to make up for that now. We don't want to be in that position, and we haven't been in that position, and that is a credit, really, to the prior governing boards, the prior operations teams for the last 40 years. I mean, they have really set us up, and we're in great shape. So also, you don't want to overfund either. You don't want to overcharge your members. So you have to have a reserve study. You have to justify why you have these funds and these monies and why you need them and when you need them. And then, to me, the largest factor is the liability factor. I did a walk with Russ Boston and our Philly rep at the end of last year. It was in July. It was hot, but Philly carries our property insurance, and we were walking our facilities, and the guy from Philly, the claims agent, was just he just couldn't stop raving about how great we are, and how we compare to other people and how well we do. And I was explaining to him the reserve study, and he goes, that's why, because you guys replace these things, all these pavements, all these cracks, all these things that happen, all of these things that we do around here contribute to the safety and wellness, and really how great the amenities are, not just in appearance, but it really saves us when it comes to liability issues. And so there's a great, we decrease our exposure tremendously by having this reserve study. So if we take a look, just a super high level look, these are the asset categories from irrigations and lakes down to IT and canopy, okay? So these are the current, this is, and I have to say this is as of June 19th, okay? So when I talk about how this changes on a daily basis, it does. So, but this, at the end of last year, essentially, the current cost of all of our assets before we rolled our reserve study into the next year, the current cost of those assets was over 100 million, okay? The fully funded balance was 60 million. So what I like to, when I look at that, when I look at the fully funded balance, I really compare that to how much have we used of our assets, okay? So we're 60% used at the end of last year of our 100 million, okay? So we have to fund that. Thankfully, that doesn't all come due at the same time, okay? So when we talk about what percentage we used, if it's a 10-year asset and the asset is 4 years old, well, we've used 40% of that asset. But we know in 6 more years, we're gonna have to replace that asset, okay? So when we look at our reserve study, that's what it tells us. It tells us overall, it tracks all of these items and gives us these numbers. So if you look down the percent used, you can see where we've made major investments recently. So the areas that are low, for example, if you look at asphalt and concrete, well, we're only 31% used there. Well, we've recently done a huge transformation and renovation of our parking lots. And that's reflective in the percent use. So only 31% use. Irrigations and lakes, if you go up to the top, 71% use. We got some old golf courses that have irrigations that need to be replaced that we're planning for, and we've done one, and we're in the middle of doing another one right now, but those are going to be done over the next till 2035. That's the last irrigation project in 2035 that we'll have. So these are all planned for, and you can see, you know, what we have to replace. Down at the bottom, you'll see IT. So even the IT items that we have, this probably doesn't surprise people, but we're 71% used on those. So, you know, we're going to make some IT investments. We're talking about that, and we're going to do that. And the board has tasked our general manager with doing that. So we've got some items that need to be taken care of here. But the good news is we've got the funds to do it, and we've planned for it. So when we create a reserve study, there's just a couple components that you have to have. You've got to have the cost and the acquisition date. Okay, you have to assign an estimated useful life, and then you have to make sure you have an inflation factor there because you know the cost of things go up over time. So I pulled one example. It's the softball infield. We've got artificial turf in the infield and on the warning track. Okay, that was done in 2019. We did that project, and mostly funded by the softball club. So kudos to them. But that's on our reserve study, and the current cost of that is $371,000. So our yearly cost on that is $37,000 a year. Those two numbers change every year by inflation. Okay, so you can see that in 2025, the fully funded balance of that is $232,000 of the $371,000. Well, by the time you get to the last year, that $371,000 current cost right there is now $452,000. So we have to have $452,000 in 2029 based on this reserve study to replace the warning track in the infield. And then you'll see based on that price in 2029 it resets, and then the first year of fully funded balance on that is $47,000. Okay, so all 1,300 and close to 1,400 line items have the same schedule that goes out, and so the estimated useful life is 10 years, the remaining is 5, and it all goes out until 30 years, for 30 years. I will say after you get past about 10 years, it starts to get a little wonky based on because the inflation gets compounded over time. So we'll talk about that a little bit later and what we're doing on that front. But very, very accurate for 10 to 15 years, very accurate. Once you get past 15, it gets a little wonky. But so key points here are, one, this is a picture in time. Okay, so June 19th, these numbers that are being shown today are from June 19th. Those numbers have changed, okay? The items are still there, but things have happened. We've reassessed. So since June 19th, we did our property walks. Everything that was up on the budget for the following year was analyzed and assessed, and we moved things down the line 1 year to 5 years down the line on some things. So those numbers have changed, and I've given some numbers, for example, to the working group, and you'll see that when you look at those numbers, they're different. In whole, they're the same. So they just get moved down. If you add up the 5 years on this report and you add up the 5 years on the other report, it's within $500,000. So in terms of anticipated spend, but we'll talk about that. So things to remember here: yearly cost, the amount used. So every year we're going to talk about what that number is. Every year we have to account for that. We have to get 1 more years of fully funded balance added to the fully funded balance. Okay, and then that amount is inflated by inflation factor. All right, and then we have assets that are, again, we're continuously evaluating these things. We are looking at the replacement costs for reasonableness. If we replace an AC unit and we know we have 20 more of those units, we look to make sure that the value that we have those 20 units on that are going to be replaced over the next however many years, the value and the current cost of that is in line with what we're currently spending. Okay, so we always look at that. So when we have multiple items, we're on the market. I mean, we've got so many items. We're experts at this, to be honest. I mean, we really are. We've got so many items that we could evaluate. I mean, you can use this as a case study for any HOA in the country. They could take our asset list and go, oh yeah, I didn't know what that costs. Let's get a cost from Sun City West. We have a lot of assets. But anyway, and then we look at the useful life. And then again, when we have new items, those get added. Those are just added dollar for dollar. Those are brand new items. So if we do an enhancement that's not in the reserve study, or a new item, that has to be added to the reserve study as well. So let's look at just kind of high level. So we talked about the fully funded balance at the beginning of 2025 is $60 million. Okay, 1 year of fully funded balance cost is $4.9 million. So that's 1 year of amortization, or whatever accounting term you want to use. That's 1 year. So we're automatically adding to our fully funded balance $4.9 million just because we rolled the year. Okay? And then we're adding 4% on top of that, of all of the assets, which equates to $2.4 million. So we're already $7 million more in fully funded balance before we take off any new capital spend that we're going to do. So if you look at this table, at the top you'll see the total fully funded balance as of June 19th for years 25 through 2030. And if you want to look just at a high level look, just to see how the numbers work and what it looks like, if you take our beginning of the year FY25 replacement fully funded balance, it's $60.2 million. If you deduct $9.4 million, which is our capital improvement spend this year, it's actually a little bit more, but allowances is elevating it, but it's $9.4 million on reserve study assets. Okay, so if you take that $9.4 million, reduce this fully funded balance, because we're resetting all those because those are brand new items, right? We're paying for them, replacing them. All right, but you add the $4.9 million and the $2.4 million, that gets you to $58.1 million, which if you look up at the top, the 2026 based on the reserve study each individual line item is $58,162,228. So this calculation at the bottom is just a proof, just a quick high level proof to show you how the reserve fund works. Okay, so you have that beginning fully funded balance. When you factor in your capital spend for the current year, you reduce it by that, and then you add back what your current cost is going to be when you roll the year and your inflation, $58.1 million. Okay? There's a lot of information here, so I want to, so And this is a short page, it's 10 slides, so we're getting close. But okay, so what I wanted to do is just show you what the anticipated spend. So we talked about the fully funded balance. So what's our anticipated spend over the next, from 2025 through 2029? So this year in our capital improvement budget, we got 9.4 million, right? So we got our 9.4 million. 2026, based on, as of June 19th, so all those items that were on the reserve study, 8.4 million was set in 2026 for a capital improvement budget. Well, we don't know because we haven't given you any numbers yet, but we'll be presenting our 2026 proposed capital improvement budget. It will be less than 8.4 million. It's going to be closer to 5 million because there's some projects on there. For example, I believe this social hall ceiling is on in 2026. It's just that 803,000. We're not going to do that. We're not going to propose that for next year because that's really tied to strategic planning. So we're holding off on that. That's one big item that's getting kicked. So that's 800 grand automatically that's coming out of that. Okay. But if you look at all these items, we kicked about 3.5 million based on versus what was on for replacement in 2026 as of June 19th. When we walked and reassessed, and then we looked at, oh, that's going to be tied to strategic planning. Let's hold off on that. Doesn't need to be done right now, and doesn't make sense to do right now, those types of things. So, but as of June 19th, that's what the spend was. So that, if that gets kicked, it just increases 27 and 28 with inflation added to it, but it does increase it, all right? So you can see right here what the anticipated spend and all these categories are going to be. If you look at irrigations and lakes, you can see 2025, 5.5 million. We've got an irrigation project there. 2026, no irrigation project. That's lake shores and planning for 2027, which is 4.7 million, irrigation project. 28, down. 29, up, irrigation projects. So you can see those irrigation projects when they're hitting. Okay, final slide. So we have this spreadsheet that's got all these like just ginormous calculations and ifs and sum ifs and crazy variables and things like that in it that help us determine what our fully funded balance is going to be and what our asset costs and things like that are and what the fully funded balance picture looks like. We've decided to implement a software management system that's going to help us with this. And it's definitely worth it in terms of cost. But we're in the middle of transitioning that. We went to, looked at a couple of different systems, got bids, and we landed on a software called Smart Property. And just a wonderful piece of software that helps us, gives us better visibility for our management team in the reserve studies. Currently now we print lists in Excel and we send those to managers, and it's just a little antiquated, but it works. But so we'll have better visibility for our management team. It'll give us real-time analysis. When we make a change, it's done instantly in the modeling and everywhere. It looks fantastic. It's more efficient for us on many different ways, and it's more accurate. So we're excited about that. We are in the middle of that. It's a little bit of a process because they don't have an association as big as us. They've got quite a few hundreds of associations that they work with. But so there's some things that we need, and they're actually customizing a little bit for us, which is cool. But we are in the process of doing that, so we're excited about that, and that'll help us manage this tool, because this is a very important tool for us in the budgeting process. But that concludes my reserve study presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, the first thing that I want to say is thank you. It's difficult that's probably an understatement to the max, very difficult to distill such complicated concepts. So thank you for that. It's something that I expect to refer many of our fellow residents and owners to, so they better understand what a reserve study is. So thanks for all of that. And thanks for taking the time to do that, because again, managing this is an important part of our future, but the nuts and bolts of it is squarely in the hands of operations. So thanks for taking the time to educate us as a committee and as a community. This is integral, all these words that we use about the reserve study and our capital investments, integral to the budgeting process that we've been in really for most of the season, but we'll be hearing much more about, as you gave us a little preview, starting in January and February, right? We'll really start to dig into those numbers and we'll see the real numbers. So now I hope that this helps the rest of the committee and our residents better understand what a reserve study is and the general perspective. So thanks to you and hats off to you and to the team. I know Pete Finelli is the analyst that really heads this up for us and has always done a great job. It really is a credit to all of our predecessor boards and committees and operations teams, as you said. And it's our goal to continue to manage things as they are. So again, a very well-managed organization in my view. That's why I bought here, but that's just my 2 cents. So with all of that, I don't have a lot of questions personally because I've had more time to understand this, but I'll throw it to our committee. Mickey, we're going to start with you first, since we usually go to the off-site person last. So any questions or insight? I know we're going to hear a bit more about the investments working group shortly, but anything from you?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. So Cliff, so you guys are using 4%. Is that what you're using like throughout the 40 years, 4% inflation?
Yeah, so that's one thing that the software will give us a little more flexibility on, because we'll be able to change. And so one of the changes that we're making in the current software, to answer your question, yes, 4% is what we're currently using. That's for the first 5 years, and then it reverts back to 3%. But now when we add assets, we'll be able to add, what we've determined is we're going to do a 4% inflation factor on assets under 10 years and assets over 10 years, or 10 years or less, and assets over 10 years will be inflated at 2.5%.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
My second question is about new capital. And so just to clarify, I think I understand it, but so the new capital spend each year is in the, just under 2 million a year or so. And that basically flows in then to the reserve study once it's spent, right? Once it's spent. And at that point, you would then apply the useful life to determine, how much of it has been used. But that's how the new capital goes in, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So we model out approximately 2 million. Built into that is our allowance. So when we model it, we put the allowance in that 1.8 million, but really most of the allowance is really tied to reserves. So, but we model it there because it gives us a little bit of buffer on the new capital. So hope that doesn't complicate things too much, but that's kind of how we model it.
And then my third question is on kind of the fact that you are constantly updating. So say in the current year, you're constantly updating the current cost of the assets, right? So if something happens, you're not relying on, we bought this 15 years ago, it's been inflated. What you're really looking at each year is an evaluation to the extent what is the current replacement value.
Yes.
Is that correct?
If there's an opportunity to put that right on the dollar, if we buy something and we've got other items that are the same, we'll make sure that we're on the dollar on those items. So we'll update them. Yes.
So one further question, just kind of on that. What about for bigger expenditures that are more construction almost? Do you look at sort of what the industry is? Do you have people who advise you? Because a lot of homeowners association would be relying on a consultant to do their reserve study. But ours is so big, you're really relying on the expertise of people that are right there. So what do you do with the bigger projects that aren't, say, a pump or a vehicle or, something smaller?
So those are, so an example of that would be an irrigation project. So we look at the per acre cost that we have, and we make sure that we try and true that up. Now, there are certain things that happen there's a little leeway there because there are certain things that happen in the economy that can drive the cost up as well. So the availability of vendors, what's going on with oil prices, a lot of those things are tied to oil and the price of oil. So it's not as cut and dry, but we do analyze them.
All
So
right,
in those
thank you.
instances, we would do that. And again, we have enough of those projects. But, there is a little bit of, we try and be as conservative as possible when we can and true those up when we know.
All right, thanks so much, Cliff.
You're welcome.
And thanks, Mickey. Rick, any questions?
Not really questions. It's amazing to me that we've got $100 million worth of assets in this community, and that's why to reproduce this community would be extremely expensive to come in and redo everything. So that's the caught me off guard that it was $100 million in capital improvements. So that when people say, "Oh, we could just replace this," it's not really true. To replace this whole community, I think you'd have to bring in a whole new developer to start all over again. So
Yeah,
Let's pray we never
interesting.
face that, but yeah.
Yeah, and if you look, this doesn't actually include the actual building. These are just the components of all of our structures. So you've got the property and the buildings themselves that are not in the reserve study. So yeah, this is just the components of those.
thanks.
Never make another one of these, I don't think.
And hopefully we won't ever need to because we're here and
That's right.
we're planning accordingly. Chris?
No, thanks. I thought I understood. Now I actually understand a little better. So I appreciate
I'm glad.
walking through that. And then just to go back a little bit on the budget. Last year there were times where either you were asked or we asked somebody, and we got some results showing how much operations, sometimes for no reason comes out and saves us money. Just does a good job. The most recent example is that comes to my mind are the steps at Beardsley Pool, right? And I don't know if it belongs in your presentation or not, but I think that residents that tune into meetings like this would appreciate learning that. Maybe we could bring something up every meeting or two, an example or two, just to show that because they're committed and they do a good job, they save us money.
We'll present in the budget process as well. So we will do that and talk about those items.
Might be good. That's a good comment, Chris. Again, off topic a bit, but as you prepare for the January update to the community, what was that date again?
At January 6th, we're gonna, at the GM Ops meeting, we'll do a just kind of state of the budget and what to look forward to. Little quick presentation at the GM Ops meeting.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
John, any questions? Jim?
Yeah, I have a quick question for you, Cliff. Thank you very much. Very informative, and actually, you gave me an aha moment. I know through my circle of friends, there's always comments about why are we doing this, why are we doing that, and yeah, I guess that's there's cost. I didn't really take in consideration the cost of kicking something down the road, because I do like the idea of saving money. We all do, but yet there's cost to saving money, if you will. I guess my one question is, the kicking the social hall ceiling. As we kick things, do we pull things as well to balance to kind of spread the peanut butter as equally as we can without having such a
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good question. When we do analyze the assets, we analyze them in terms of operationally, is this going to save us money or does it make sense? And there's a lot of different factors in there on that. One of those other factors has to be what's the plans for the future? Because if you look at, for example, you look at the social hall ceiling, they don't make those tiles anymore, okay? And the acoustics in there are pretty good, but the lighting in there is not good. So to change that lighting, you have to change that ceiling. And, it becomes a question of, is that something you want to invest in now? Or is it tied to maybe a strategic plan item that you may maybe reimagine that space later? I don't know. So there's a lot of things that kind of impact that. That project now becomes, well, it's not really a repair and replacement. Now it's an enhancement. Okay. So then now you're looking at it differently and it's impacting the reserve fund differently too. So all things that need to be considered. Yes, generally speaking, if an item is on the reserve study and it's deemed, for example, the pin setters, $800,000 that's coming up in this 2026 budget, we want to do those pin setters. They're starting to break down. They're starting to cost us more in the maintenance area, and we want to do those, and we'll be pushing for that in the budget process. I hope that kind of answers your question, but yeah, we don't really look at it as we need to spread it, so to speak. It's more of an operational and cost conversation that we have. We look at. It's funny. We went through the exercise. Pete and I did. We took a whole year's. So I do model this in the budget. So we always have that kind of 5-year model that I do. In there's the anticipated capital spend, the reserve, the fully funded balance, and we do the FFB percent out for 5 years. So we do model this. We took 1 year of $8 million and change roughly and kicked it down 3 years, and it cost us 2 points on our FFB by not doing it, which 2 points is about $1 million. If we took 8 million and said we're not going to do those reserve, and boy, look at our FFB percent. It looks so much better the next 2 years. But ultimately, when we got to that year where we decided to do it, we were 2 points down.
and that's what I was kind of poking on, is that, yeah, we're saving money today, but it's going to cost us tomorrow. And the one thing that I kind of hear, that folks live here for a purpose, a reason. The amenities, obviously, but the cost as well. And so I guess that's what I was just trying to poke on, is that, well, we save today, it costs tomorrow, and people living on fixed income and whatnot. I just hope that if we're kicking, if we're pulling to where it balances. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Yes.
It sounds as though also as the strategic planning efforts continue, some of that new investment obviously we'll see some changes in this. As you mentioned, it's a living document.
Yes.
The social hall being pulled out, there's likely to be, in that particular example, there's likely to be something else after a little bit more planning takes place. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So just, sort of stating the obvious for could be obvious, could be not, for those who are listening or watching. Thank you again. Any other questions from the residents who are here? We are having a lot of problems with our live stream today. It's still frozen. So for those who are listening later, because I know that it will be posted, a recording will be posted later. So if you do have questions, again, my email, christine.novello@suncitywest.com. You're welcome to send questions in, and we'll funnel those, if appropriate, to the right people for response. Any other questions in the room? We do have someone stepping to the microphone. And I believe, sir, you know this drill, but nonetheless, name and rec card number when you have the opportunity, please.
Bill Weaver, 124087. I'm just wondering what rules regulate the APF. I worry that the APF is increasing faster than the cost of housing in the community, and we're using it to pay for new expenses and things that somehow should be done differently. And I worry that the APF, I'd like to see a chart of the increase in housing over the last 10 years and the increase in APF to see that it's in line with the cost of the houses and the properties in the area, so that we're not using that as a way to stay within the 40% that we have targeted for the reserve fund. The other thing that I kind of have concern about is the 40%. I don't understand how the 40% came about. That's 40% of the fully funded balance, which is only 60% used. So it doesn't cover 40% of everything. It's only 40% of what's used. And are we covering emergencies?
So Cliff, would you like to respond?
Yes, a couple of very good, valid points in there. So when we talk about that 60 million on 100 million, so the 60 million is the fully funded balance, and we have 30 million in our reserve fund. So granted that 60 million isn't all going to come up at once, but we do have it funded for 30 million. And then our capital spend every year fluctuates anywhere from 5 to 12 million based on anticipated spend. Our cash inflows are APF fees, which are 5 to 6 million. Our income from operations, which generally is $1 million to $2 million. So you got, let's call it 6 million there. And then fortunate to have some investment income at about $1 million a year that we can depend on this year and next. So 7 million in inflows. So positive 2 million one year, minus 2.5, 3 million next year. Positive 2 million one year, minus 2, 3 million the next year. So yes, we do have funds. We fund our capital spend, essentially. And that 30 million is sitting there for enhancements and new ventures, but it also tells us how healthy we are in our reserve fund when we compare that to our fully funded balance. Because we know that those things are going to need to be replaced down the line. The comment on the APF fee and the increase in the property values, kind of that would be interesting to look at for sure. I will say the APF fee is kind of set by the market as well. And we know that the surrounding communities were all about the same. And people should have to buy in here. When you've bought in and you've invested in this community, the longer you live here, the more you pay your dues, the more that you fund all of these great amenities. And people should have to buy into that if they're going to be an owner member. So we don't want to get out of line with it. So we do model an increase on APF fees, but they are looked at every year as part of the budgeting process. So and part of that is just a market study to see what's going on and where we're at. But it'd be interesting to look at and analyze it that way. We can probably do that.
All right.
Thank you. And just to also let you know, Mr. Weaver, probably already know because you've looked at these, but we're in the throes of analyzing policy. So right now one of our financial policies, and I had to look it up to be sure, but it's FI4 is the one that the board and this committee set that 40% floor. So there's a working group that's looking at that policy and our overall investment policy as well. So if there are any recommended changes, you'll be hearing about that. But
okay, I only bring that up is because when I first got here, the administration at that time was targeting 70% of fully funded balance, and it's shifted.
Yeah, so let me talk on that a little bit. So industry standard for homeowners associations, they say you start to get into some maybe bad waters when you're under 30%. So that's kind of like the benchmark in terms of associations. Now, we've also in our reserve fund, we fund new capital and enhancements, things that aren't on the reserve study. So we have to be higher than 30% because we have to fund those things so that we can keep the community, evolve with the changing demographics. So, and then also position ourselves for new items that get added every year based on inflation. So I think I wasn't here when they determined 40%. I will say, though, I've heard some stories about they were 70% funded at one point. They didn't have the proper irrigation. The values and the values on these big projects were not there to Vicky's point. They weren't. Pete did a ton of work with Todd and Russ and just looked at the whole reserve study. And there were things like lakeshore projects and things like that that needed to get revalued. Irrigation projects were way behind. We hadn't really done any, so we weren't on the market on those. So we got on the market on those. So that dropped that FFB down significantly when that was reevaluated. And we're in good shape now, though.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other questions from our residents? I don't think our live stream's back up, but I'm going to just check. Nothing online at this point. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry.
I had one other brief question. Have we ever considered self-insurance? Have we studied how much we're paying for insurance?
For our property insurance, in
Yes,
other words?
versus how much we're getting back from it over the years. And with the reserve fund, if we're increased to include the the insurance policy, would we pay for our self-insurance and save overhead and not have to deal with insurance companies?
I believe that the renewal, they always look at that as an option. Am I correct?
Well, I would say that for us, it's not really an option, and here's why. Our reserve fund is great. So we don't have an insurance on our reserve fund, for example. So our reserve fund our insurance is to help ensure that our reserve fund is used for what it's. So if we have a catastrophe, that's what our insurance is for. To reserve those funds in an environment where we're trying to stay
Right.
40 to 70% in our reserve fund, and to try and fund that with, 1 point is $500,000 in our reserve fund. That's a $20 dues increase just for $500,000 to our members.
Yeah, it does not behoove us at this time.
Yeah,
It's just,
so-
we'll, I think.
It's a good
that's
question.
It's a fair question.
Yeah,
but-
we could look back and go, boy, we didn't really have any claims, but when we do get that one claim, we're gonna be glad we have insurance. For sure.
But thanks for the questions, and thank you as well for taking those under consideration, Cliff. And still nothing else. So thank you, Cliff. I believe we can move on. And
Right.
and again, our thanks for that. So we're going to move on now to 3.03, a short update because we're really in 3.03 and 3.04 talking about policy, everybody's favorite topic. Woo! No, seriously, this is an important aspect of what we do in the board, and a very integral part of what we do as a committee. We formed a working group looking broadly at our overall investment policies. Those are FI4 and FI12, as I just mentioned. Mickey Jacobs and Rick Ruffey are our committee members that are on that working group. And before I turn it to them for a substantive update, I just want to remind everyone, the dates are noted and posted on board docs. And while they are working sessions, meaning it's not there's a lot of analysis and looking at spreadsheets and things that may or may not be exciting, they are open to any owner who wishes to observe. So we did have a few folks who were looking in the window but opted to not come in. Our next meeting for that working group is coming up in early January. So with that, I believe since Rick is here in person, although Mickey could give the update, Rick, you're going to give us a quick update on where we stand with the working group. Am I correct?
That's correct. Okay, first of all, Cliff, I'd like to thank you for making this presentation. because that's probably the other half of what we're looking at for the study. So one of the things that when we look at these two policies, we're not going to rewrite the entire policy. We're just looking at a couple of benchmarks that are embedded in the policy and look at them and what the impact they have on the community. One of the things Mickey has done is she's developed a model using a lot of the historical data that Cliff has been working with. And we're looking at those and taking that data and moving it forward based on several iterations of different strategies that we want to implement. Not implement, but just look at where we're going to be, and not 5 years, but 10 years and 20 years, based upon our current environment and what it would be if we move to different scenarios. At that point, we're looking to develop a capital investment strategy that could be implemented if a change is necessary. And with that, we'd be working with Cap Trust to make sure this implementation or changeover could be done efficiently and effectively, because as everybody knows, when you make a change in something, the devil's in the details. So if you don't go through the details on how this would actually be accomplished, it would end up being, we want to make sure it's successful, not a failure. At that point in time, once we've had all our ducks in a row, we will bring this back to the Finance Committee with our findings, with our recommendations, and let them take a stab at it and go from there. If it's approved by the Finance Committee, the next step we'll do is we'll bring that to the governing board and the community with our recommendations. And we'll make a presentation that, in a lot of this situation, we're talking about a lot of financial terms and those things. What we would do is do it in everyday common language that our community members can understand, but also the board. So, and this process, it's not an overnight process, so it will take some time to get this developed. That's because we have vacation times, we have other priorities of boards, and we want to make sure that we do a good job at presenting our whole case so that everybody can know and understand what the facts are. So.
Yeah, it's really essential for all of these policies. This one required some, in the view of the committee, some extra work, and we thank you, Ricky and Mickey, for taking on the deeper dive together with Cliff and his team, myself as the advisor. But this one does require quite a bit of modeling and so forth, so we appreciate all of that. We'll be looking to and I know a couple of members of the committee have already provided feedback and input, so the committee will continue to do that, the board will continue to do that, and of course our community at each of our working sessions right there. Everybody is welcome, because the key thing here is visibility and listening to everybody's concerns and input as well. So we'll be doing that. This committee will be seeing a more substantive update in January, or either our late January, early February meetings, one or both of those. The governing board will get a work in process update in February as well. So again, everyone can provide that feedback to the working group as they continue to refine a potential recommendation for the, I can't remember how you put it, but the nuts and bolts, some of those data points, and it's what we're investing in, how we're investing, what's the proportion, if any, if there are going to be any recommended changes and shifts in the proportion of fixed versus equity investments, and in that FFB percentage as well. So, Mickey, anything else that you wanted to add before we throw it to the committee?
The only thing that I would say is that what we're really trying to do is look at the data, right? So we want to look at the data. We want to look at what's actually out there, and what we're using that data to help us with is to determine what are our cash flow requirements. What does that look like? What are the parameters that we might be able to use, and what are a variety of scenarios that may make sense, under different circumstances. So what I want people to understand is that what we're trying to do is look at this from the perspective of our actual data, historical information, and then saying, what would make sense for us? What would make sense for us and our association, the health of our association? And so it's really, and that's why we modeled it, right? We're modeling it out so that we can say, here are some likely scenarios. Do these make sense or not?
Thanks for the added perspective and color. So any questions from the committee for the working group before we move on? Again, all invited for input and so forth, and our thanks to you. The key is to focus on those nuts and bolts of the content, as Rick was noting. Any questions from our residents or from anyone who's here in the room?
Gary Bach, 135435. They talked about looking forward, doing scenarios and that. At some point, the policy was made with these numbers that we have currently, and I'm sure somewhere in the past before that, numbers were made and have changed. So are you looking back into why were the numbers that we're using now set? Was there something that happened that, said we need to go more conservative or less conservative in the past? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Gary. It's great to see the face as well, because you're a regular attendee, and thank you, just on a personal level. Thank you for that. Nonetheless, I can answer to a degree that yes, the working group is indeed looking at what drove some of the changes in the past, but really trying to look at more what would best serve us going forward. So we do have some folks both on the financial staff who are giving us that perspective, and we are well aware that there were some really salient, very key changes that occurred in the past that drove some of the changes in these policies. So we're aware of those, and but the working group is really trying to look at it going forward. Is this still in our best interest as a community, based on what we know now, and have things change? So certainly not. The last thing we would ever do is second guess any of the decisions in the past. They were made with full faith, with a lot of analysis, we believe, and we'll leave it at that. So this is more looking at, have things changed, and would we benefit as an association from making any changes? I think that's
Thank you.
And anything else I can add there?
No, it was just the idea that, again, like you said, there was these changes in the past. It's like, was there some disaster that, somebody that's newer maybe isn't aware of, that said, we need to go more conservative?
Sure.
Or that in the past, why were those decisions made? So I just, want to make sure
Absolutely.
we're looking at those.
And you can look we're all fortunately old enough to remember some of the big shifts that have occurred in the economy, right? In 2007, 8, sometime again in the, the mid-teens, 15, 16, and most recently in late 2020, early 2021, right? So, and those were the timings of some of the key shifts that were made in investment policy that we're aware of. There might have been others prior to that, but those are some of the most obvious ones. So there were decisions made at that time to respond accordingly to what was predicted to be, expected in economy going forward. It's a bit of predictions are always a difficult thing to do. So one of the things that we've learned more recently, I believe, as a community is the need to work, perhaps, while we do need the ability to work quickly on making some adjustments going forward, but also analyze the impacts, because sometimes some of these investments are long-term and they're designed to be. So we've learned the value of holding firm in the face of some adversity, I believe. It's a lot. It's a big bundle of considerations, as Rick and Mickey were alluding to. So whatever the committee decides to recommend going forward, if there are any changes that are recommended, there would be it would not be a very quick shift. It would require a big consideration on how to make those changes. So we can only recommend the hows, the what's, not the hows right away, but we'll work hand in glove. I think that was the big. Yes, Rick?
Another thing is, while we have benchmarks set in these policies, it doesn't mean that we have to come up with an exact number, an exact benchmark. We're looking at maybe coming up with ranges that you can work with, ranges in between as you move into the new policy if we implement that. And the best thing is, from my perspective, it's much better to deal with ranges than absolute numbers, because then you're really locked in. If you have a range, you've got some flexibility to move forward, and that you don't have to redo this reserve every time you come up with, we don't like that number, or we're not meeting that number, then you have to redo this again, so.
But again, that's something that you and Mickey are considering as one of the possibilities to recommend back. Yeah.
Possibilities, yes.
So, very good. Thanks again. We're going to move on to the rest of our policy content reviews with a similar lens. We've been talking about this for a couple of meetings now, just to clarify that we're looking at the content of the policies, not so much the format and so forth. So do our existing policies, other than 4 and 12, do they continue to serve our community in their current form? Are there any major gaps or issues? So the members of the committee have been working on this for a couple of months. We've talked about it, and I'm just going to do a quick round robin, and then we'll entertain a recommendation if necessary at that point. So I did hear from some of our absent members. Ed Westall had no recommendations. He reviewed both 15 and 16 and believes that those remain in the best interests of our association. Similarly, David Perot looked at both policy 11 and policy 20, FI 11 and FI 20, and found no content that was not serving our community. Mickey, we did speak a bit about what you were looking at for FI1 and FI3. Did you see anything that is in need of a content update at this time?
No, I think Christine, that what we decided is that content was okay, that that we are not going to deal with format at
Exactly.
this point. And so no changes were requested or recommended, I should say.
Thank you so much. For FI2, that is Rick. So Rick, you took a look at FI2, capital expenditures, budgeting. Could you give us, could you come off of?
There were no changes.
Thank you so much. And John, you looked at FI5.
Yep, it was good.
Okay. And Jim, you looked at FI9, I believe. I'm looking at the list. FI9. Any content changes that you would recommend?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Chris, you looked at FI10.
Yes, you know, I did my homework, I just didn't turn it in. I have one small recommendation. I don't like having a policy that can probably won't be followed or has consequences unnecessary. It's a small change. My recommendation. It's under vendor relationships. Right now, gratuities.
So I'm going to, yeah, what you need to do is redline it and send
Okay.
it back to us for the next meeting.
Great,
So,
I will do that.
I'm sorry to
I'll
interrupt
turn
you.
my homework in.
So just redline it quickly, or note the changes necessary. We'll get that onto the agenda for
Will do.
January.
Great.
Thank you, sir. And that is FI10. So then I'd be looking for someone to make a recommendation that for the remaining policies, we're recommending FI1, 2, 3, 5, 9, 11, 15, 16, and 20. Thank you. That those are fine as they are. Would someone be willing to make the recommendation for that?
I'll recommend that those are fine.
Thank you. Voice vote for our attending members that we're in agreement. We'll start with Mickey. Yes means that you're fine.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So there'll be no specifics that are required at the governing board, but I'll pass that recommendation on to the governing board at our next pertinent meeting. We will look at FI10, the potential changes there at our January meeting. Thanks, Chris. And again, 4 and 12 are under review by a working group because we're looking at those content. But thanks for that. And that can, any questions? Oops, I almost forgot. Any questions or comments from our community on those recommendations of policy content? Okay, great. So with that, we've wrapped up 3.05 and we'll move on to committee comments, section 4.01. Jim, why don't we start with you on this one? Any additional comments or input?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, sir. John?
And no comments.
Chris?
No comments.
Rick?
All I want to do is say thanks to Cliff with all the information that you supplied it for us to move forward in this. And Christine, and your time as an advisor and help us guide us through this process. It's new to all of us. So we're working step by step. So I appreciate the time.
Of course. Literally my job, my volunteer job, but thank you. Mickey, any questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Great. Before we toss it to guest comments, I do have one thing that I wanted to add, and that's really what you're seeing here. I really want to thank the members of the Budget and Finance Committee. All of our committees, all of our standing committees work very, very hard and diligently. There's a lot of detailed analysis that goes on behind the scenes, and there's a lot of work that some of you who may be watching or observing don't see. And I really want to thank them, each and every one of them, for doing that. The other thing that I wanted to convey for those of you who may wonder, again, I alluded to it at the start of the meeting, but whether you see someone's face physically or not, there's a lot of work that's going on. Both Ed and Mickey, for various reasons, were traveling or so forth. You may not have seen them early on in our season. We have a few folks who are traveling now, and the only thing that I ask for each and every one of us is to remember a sense of empathy, because sometimes what we don't see in each other is all the personal struggles that are happening. The members of this committee, without naming names, have had some pretty serious health struggles. They've lost very close members of their family. They're dealing with loss and substantive life impacts that you may not see, and I'm not going to disclose because it's very personal. So I only ask that you may have a little bit of empathy and understanding. So for some of our folks who are working remotely, I'm not saying that they're the folks that are involved in what I was just saying, but sometimes, there's a lot of work that's going on that you may not see physically. So bear that in mind and know you have my assurance that each and every one of the folks on this committee, all 7 of my colleagues, are working really hard, and I really appreciate that. And I'm sure that you do too. So I just wanted to add that little note about that participation, and now invite any of our residents or other guests who may want to ask any questions, more questions about or add comments. All right, seeing none, and again, knowing that we have a bit of an issue with our live stream, just wanted to convey then before we leave, a very, very happy holiday season, the remainder of the holiday season, to each and every one of you, my colleagues here on Budget and Finance, and to all of you who are here and are listening. May the new year bring us all great health, prosperity, and continued joy. Exactly. So very, very happy holidays and a happy new year to all of you. We will see you at our next full meeting for the Budget and Finance Committee is scheduled for Tuesday, January 21st, right here in the lecture hall. The Investments Policy Working Group will have 2 more meetings ahead of that, so watch board docs and so forth for the specifics, and we hope to see you at our next full meeting. Thanks again. This meeting's adjourned at